They didn't tell me I was banned from the wedding. They just sent a message. No name. No call. Just a line that read guest list is finalized. Had to make some tough cuts. Hope you understand. Love you. But I wasn't a distant cousin or a college roommate. I was her sister. The same sister who drove her to clinics at midnight. Who paid off her credit card debt. Who sat beside her on the bathroom floor when she couldn't breathe from her last breakup. And now I was just cut. They said it was about budget. But the guest list had 180 names, teachers, childhood friends, even her old piano tutor. Not me. So I didn't cry, I didn't ask why. I packed a suitcase, booked a bungalow over the Indian Ocean, and left the country with the one person who never made me earn my place, the man I chose to build a life with. While they toasted champagne in New York, I watched the sun dip into the Maldives Sea. And when her wedding collapsed in real time, they blew up my phone. But by then I was long gone, and I had already remembered what it felt like to be loved without needing permission. My name is Amelia Brown. And this is how my sister erased me from her wedding and how I reclaimed more than she ever meant to take. The message came in at 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday. I was standing by the kitchen island, still in my robe, sipping the first lukewarm coffee of the day when my phone buzzed. Hey, just wanted to let you know the guest list is finalized and we had to make some tough cuts. Hope you understand. Love you. That was it. No salutation, no punctuation, not even my name. Just a dry update from my younger sister Ashley, delivered like a weather forecast. I stared at the screen, rereading it 5 or 6 times. Guest list finalized. Tough cuts. Hope you understand. I wasn't a distant cousin. I wasn't an old friend from summer camp or a coworker who sent obligatory birthday texts. I was her sister. Her only sister. And now I was apparently just a number on a spreadsheet, easy to delete. My fingers moved almost on their own as I tapped my mother's contact. She picked up on the second ring, her voice overly bright. Hey sweetheart, everything okay? I didn't bother with pleasantries. I just got a message from Ashley. She says the guest list is finalized and I'm not on it. There was a pause. Barely a second, but just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Oh, honey, she sighed, slipping into that sing-song tone she always used when she thought I was overreacting. It's just a wedding. Don't make it into a whole thing. I felt my stomach twist. My voice came out more level than I expected. Mom, I'm her sister. How am I not invited to my own sister's wedding? She clucked her tongue like I'd spilled juice on the carpet. It's not personal. They had to keep it small and I cut her off. Small, I just saw her Instagram post. She's inviting 180 people. Including that girl from 8th grade she used to call a backstabber. There was silence again. Then a forced little laugh. Well, you know how weddings are, expensive, stressful. Maybe they figured you wouldn't mind sitting this one out. Wouldn't mind. I didn't raise my voice, but I could feel the heat rising. I helped her move across the country. Twice. I gave her money when she couldn't make rent. I stayed on the phone with her until 3 in the morning when Trevor ghosted her for a week. But now I'm not worth a seat at a wedding. Oh, stop being dramatic, my mother replied with an audible sigh. It's just one day. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Right. Just one day. One day that I apparently didn't deserve to be part of. I already knew how it would go. I'd express my hurt. She'd dismiss it. Ashley would maybe throw me a half-hearted apology next week, and I'd be expected to move on because that's what I've always done. But not this time. Something inside me shifted just slightly, but enough to make the air feel different in the room. If I wasn't wanted, I wouldn't be there. I hung up without saying goodbye. The quiet that followed was almost too loud. I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, the kitchen clock ticking like it was mocking me. Then I walked to the living room where Daniel sat on the couch reading emails with his glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up, concern already forming on his face. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I just walked over, sank beside him, and held out my phone. He read the message silently, then looked at me. So you're not invited? Nope. He set the phone down and stood up, walked to the bar cart we barely used, and poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass. It's 9 in the morning, I said. He handed me the glass. If there was ever a morning for it. I took a sip. It burned just enough. She invited everyone else, I said, still stunned. Like friends from yoga. Her boss. Even one of Trevor's groomsmen who tried to kiss me at a barbecue once. But me, her own sister. No space. Daniel sat beside me again. He didn't say anything right away. He just put his hand over mine and squeezed gently. They don't get to decide your worth, Amelia. If they don't want you there, then we go somewhere you're wanted. Where would that be? I asked, more bitter than I meant to. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled faintly. How do you feel about white sand, turquoise water, and zero family politics? I blinked. Maldives, he nodded. We've been talking about going forever. Why not now let them have their big wedding with their big drama? We'll have something better. I didn't answer right away. I just took another sip and stared out the window. Rain tapped against the glass. The Pacific Northwest never tried to pretend it was glamorous. But maybe I didn't have to stay in the rain this time. Maybe I didn't have to beg for inclusion only to be tolerated. Daniel stood again and grabbed his laptop. Let's just see what's out there, no pressure. I leaned over his shoulder as he typed. Flights. Resorts. Ocean bungalows that looked like they belonged in travel magazines. For once, the idea of leaving didn't feel like running away. It felt like choosing myself. Daniel turned and kissed my temple. If they don't want you at the table, then we build our own. Somewhere warm. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I'm not treated like a placeholder. I nodded slowly. Yeah, let's do that. He smiled and resumed searching. And I sat there watching the screen glow already, starting to imagine what it would feel like to watch the sun rise from the other side of the world. Daniel clicked through the images, slowly letting me absorb every last bit of turquoise water and sun-soaked balconies. Each resort looked more surreal than the last. One had outdoor bathtubs suspended over the ocean. Another featured private candlelit dinners on a sandbar that disappeared at high tide. He turned slightly toward me without taking his hand off the trackpad. We could be there in 48 hours. No drama. No passive-aggressive toasts. Just us. My lips parted slightly, more in awe than response. I nodded. It wasn't even a real decision. It felt like the answer had been waiting inside me for a long time, just looking for a moment of silence to rise. Book it. He smiled like a man relieved, like he'd been waiting for me to choose peace and not performance. It took less than 20 minutes. Flights locked. Resort confirmed. A week at a place called Sola Breeze Private Villas on the southern edge of the Maldives. Bungalow over the water, breakfast included, no children allowed. We didn't pack right away. I sat at the edge of the bed staring at my suitcase for a full 5 minutes, unsure if this counted as an escape or something braver. That evening I called my mother again. She answered on the third ring. Hi, Amelia. Her voice was flat this time. Like she already assumed why I was calling. I'm not coming to the wedding, I said. There was a pause. A longer one. Amelia, don't do this. This isn't what Ashley needs right now. What Ashley needs is a mirror. I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm just not going. You're overreacting. Again. It's one day. Let your sister have her moment. You mean the moment where she deletes me from her life and expects applause? She sighed loudly, the kind of sigh that said I was the exhausting one. Again. Look, Ashley is younger. She's been through a lot. You've always been stronger. That's not a compliment. It is. You just refuse to see it. She needs the spotlight right now. Can you let her have that? I paused. Not because I was confused, but because something finally clicked into place. My entire life had been that question. Can you let her have it? Can you move aside? Can you dim a little, just for her? I'm not stealing her spotlight, I said quietly. She just never wanted to share it. Mom didn't answer. I could picture her in the kitchen, probably slicing fruit she wouldn't eat, pretending the call had dropped, even though we both knew it hadn't. Tell her I wish her the best, I said. But Daniel and I have plans. We'll be out of the country. Out of the country, yes. Are you punishing her number? I'm protecting myself. I hung up before she could try to turn it back into guilt. My heart thumped harder than I expected. I wasn't used to drawing lines. Not with her. Not with any of them. That night I folded clothes into my suitcase slowly, methodically, as if I were measuring each decision. Bathing suits, sundresses, a white linen button-down I loved but never wore. Daniel packed across from me in silence until I held up a small velvet box that had been sitting in my drawer for months. "We never really made a plan," I said, holding it out. He took the box gently and opened it. The ring glinted softly in the warm light of our bedroom. "Do you still want to do this?" "I do," I said, but not with their noise surrounding it. "What if we made this trip our engagement?" he asked. "Just us. No announcements, no parties. Just a moment that's ours." I blinked back, unexpected tears. Not sadness, something warmer. Like the version of me I'd been trying to become had finally taken root. That would be perfect. He put the ring on my finger then and there, with no speech, no bending down, just a quiet, certain kind of intimacy. I didn't post it. I didn't text anyone. It lived just between us the way I wanted it to. The next morning we left for the airport. I wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and Daniel brought coffee in our travel mugs because I hated airport espresso. As we sat in the back of the lift, I scrolled through my phone, absently deleting old photos I didn't need anymore. Ashley's latest story popped up automatically. Her and Trevor at a cake tasting, laughing, surrounded by her bridesmaids. I paused over it just long enough to feel the sting. Then I closed the app and put the phone away. Daniel reached over, rested his hand over mine. "We're building something better," he said. And I believed him. Not just because he said it, but because I felt it in my chest, like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. We checked and moved through security and found our gate early. As we sat waiting for boarding, I looked around at the other travelers. Honeymooners, families, solo backpackers. Everyone chasing something or running from something. Maybe both. When we finally boarded and found our seats in business class, I looked out the window and let the city shrink beneath us. Portland disappeared under a layer of clouds, and I didn't feel homesick. Not even a little. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't orbiting someone else's life. And this time the center was mine. Melissa was the only person I told. We were still close even if we didn't talk every week. She had been my roommate sophomore year at Northwestern, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and asked real questions. She didn't gasp or press for details when I told her I was flying to the Maldives instead of attending my sister's wedding. "Good for you," she texted back. "Honestly, you deserve a break from their circus." Her words made something in me settle. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was tired of holding my breath every time I entered a room that should have felt like home. We landed in Malé just as Ashley posted a boomerang of herself twirling in a strapless wedding gown. I didn't click for sound, but I could tell from the expressions that the room was full of her signature laugh, the kind that always made me feel like I was being laughed at instead of with. Daniel glanced at the screen briefly, but didn't comment. He handed our passports to the resort driver, a quiet man named Rafik, who greeted us with cold towels and bottles of water as we stepped into the black SUV. The drive to the dock was short, maybe 20 minutes. I barely remember the scenery. My mind floated somewhere between the scent of ocean air and the overwhelming quiet of not being needed. The seaplane ride took another 45 minutes. We flew low over a chain of tiny green islands, each dotted with thatched roof bungalows and white beaches that looked photoshopped. Daniel reached over and laced his fingers with mine. Neither of us said much. When we arrived at Sola Breeze Villas, a hostess in a flowing coral dress greeted us with hibiscus drinks and a smile that didn't feel forced. "Welcome, Miss Brown and Mr. Carter. You'll be in Villa 7. Privada deck, direct ocean access, sunrise view." We followed her down a wooden boardwalk that stretched out over the water, wind fluttering the hem of my linen dress. I tried not to look too eager, but my jaw dropped a little when she opened the door. The villa was wide and light and quiet. Glass walls framed an endless blue horizon. There was a deep soaking tub with flower petals already drifting in the water. A tray of fresh fruit sat beside a bottle of chilled Prosecco. Daniel dropped our bags and walked out to the balcony. I followed barefoot. The wood was warm under my feet. We stood there together, looking out at the sea. No Ashley. No guest lists. No last-minute emergencies that somehow always ended up in my lap. It felt like arriving somewhere I didn't know I'd been trying to reach. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each item placed with care like I was building a version of myself I wanted to keep. When I finished, I opened my phone for the first time since the airport. No missed calls. No messages. No one even seemed to notice I was gone. Except Melissa, who had sent a photo of her cat in a sun hat with the caption, "Your vacation twin." I smiled. That night we had dinner on our deck. The sky faded from lavender to deep blue while a private chef brought plate after plate of seafood I couldn't pronounce but devoured anyway. Daniel poured wine and told a story about getting lost in Venice that made me laugh until my ribs hurt. It wasn't a celebration. Not exactly, but it felt like one. After dessert, I opened my phone again. Still nothing from Ashley. Still nothing from Mom. Except one notification. A message from my mother sent that afternoon. "Can you tell me where the garage key is? The one with the storage boxes from your old room." That was it. No hello. No mention of where I was or why. Just a request. Daniel glanced over my shoulder as I read it. "Wow," he said. "Touching." I replied with a single sentence. "Top drawer of the desk." Then I turned my phone off. The moonlight spilled across the water, reflecting silver against the waves. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. Daniel clinked his glass against mine. "To disappearing." I shook my head. "To not being searched for." "And maybe," I said quietly, "that's a kind of freedom too." He didn't answer. He just reached for my hand and held it there warm and steady while the sea rustled below us like a lullaby. The next morning started slow, the way mornings should when you're nowhere near obligation. I woke to the sound of water brushing against the stilts beneath our villa and the faint smell of coffee. Daniel was already out on the deck barefoot, holding 2 mugs and staring into the distance like he'd been up for hours. I joined him without a word, curling into the chair beside him and taking the coffee he handed me. The sky was still pale, the sun barely rising, and the world felt paused. "I could get used to this," I murmured. "That's the idea," he said. We didn't speak much over breakfast, just soft smiles and the occasional touch of a hand. Around noon we swam in the shallows off our deck, the water warm and clear. A school of tiny silver fish darted past my legs, and Daniel floated beside me, eyes closed, arms wide, like he was letting the ocean carry every ounce of tension from his body. Later, we napped. Not because we were tired, but because we could. When evening came, he surprised me with dinner on the beach. Not the resort's standard candlelit setup, but something he arranged privately with the staff. A simple linen-draped table, string lights above us hanging from 2 poles buried in the sand, a small fire pit flickering nearby. I hadn't worn makeup in 2 days. My hair was still damp from swimming. But when Daniel looked at me across that table, I felt more seen than I had in years. We toasted with chilled rosé, the glasses sweating in the humid air. "To doing nothing," I said. "To doing it together," he replied. The first course arrived, some kind of grilled octopus with citrus and herbs. I had no idea what I was eating, but it was perfect. Between bites, we started talking about things we hadn't said aloud yet. "What if we just kept this?" I said. "Not just the trip, the stillness, the clarity. What if our lives felt more like this, less like a never-ending emergency?" Daniel smiled. He had a way of smiling that didn't need words to follow. "Then let's make it that way. You and me. Not what your mom wants. Not what your sister expects." I nodded. And for the first time, it didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like choosing peace. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, hands wrapped around my wine glass. "You know, I helped Ashley get her first job after college. She had a meltdown the day of her second interview, called me sobbing because her suit didn't fit and she forgot her portfolio. I skipped a product launch to drive across the city with backup clothes and a new binder. She never said thank you. She just texted me later that she got the offer and tagged our parents in her Facebook post." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened. "And when she racked up $6,000 in credit card debt 2 years later, I loaned her the money to pay it off so Mom wouldn't find out. She paid me back 6 months late with a Starbucks gift card tucked into the envelope, like that made it cute." I took another sip, my throat tightening. Every time Trevor broke up with her, she came to my apartment. I made her tea. I made excuses to my manager when she slept through her alarm and made me late to work. I listened to her say the same things over and over like they were fresh revelations. And still she uninvited you, Daniel said gently. She erased me. He looked down, tracing a fingertip through the condensation on his glass. Can I ask you something? Sure. If you could go back and choose again knowing how this all played out, would you still have done all that for her? The question hung there longer than it should have. I thought of the nights I spent holding her hand through anxiety attacks. The emergency vet bill she couldn't afford. The birthday party I threw her when Mom forgot. So many small things, most of which I hadn't spoken of in years. Would I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I don't know, I whispered. Daniel didn't press. He just reached for my hand again and gave it a soft squeeze. That's okay. You don't have to know yet. The fire popped quietly beside us, casting dancing shadows across the sand. In the distance, waves lapped the shore like they always had, unaware that somewhere across the world a wedding was being planned without me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to be part of it. The sky was darker when we returned to the villa, the stars brighter than I'd ever seen back home. I peeled off my sandals, let my feet touch the warm wood of the deck, and breathed in air that didn't carry the weight of anyone's expectations. Inside, Daniel poured 2 glasses of water and sat beside me on the lounge chair, close enough that I could feel his shoulder brushing mine. I didn't speak for a long time. The waves did most of the talking. She used to call me the anchor, I said, finally. Daniel looked over. Your mom number, my grandmother. Jean. I don't talk about her much. You don't have to, he said. No, I want to. She deserves to be remembered. He nodded and waited. She wasn't warm in the traditional sense, no sugary voice or big hugs, but she was steady, practical. She taught me how to change a tire, how to roast a chicken, how to file my taxes. More than that, she saw me. Like, really saw me. I leaned back and stared up at the sky. When Mom used to snap at me for being too opinionated or too serious, Grandma would pull me aside and say, "You're not too anything. You're the spine in this family." She always said I'd be the one to hold things together long after the pretty speeches were forgotten. Daniel smiled slightly. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She died in January of 2022. Right after New Year's. Heart failure. It was quick. I flew down to Eugene to help with everything. Cleaned out her pantry. Called the hospice nurse. Saturday on the porch alone with her cat for hours while Mom and Ashley went through her jewelry. I paused, the memory sharp and strange like a bruise I'd only just noticed. She told me 2 months before she passed that she'd updated her will. She wanted me to have the house. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. 2 bedrooms. Outdated kitchen. But she said it was the only thing she could leave me that was entirely hers. A kind of thank you, I guess. And then after she died, Mom said there was a new version. That Grandma changed her mind. Gave the house to the family to be used however we saw fit. Daniel frowned. You ever see that version number? Just took her word for it. I was too tired to argue. And part of me thought maybe it was Grandma's way of keeping the peace even from the grave. But something about that night made the whole thing come back uninvited and unresolved. I turned toward him. I can still see where she kept the folder. Top drawer of the old desk in the back room. Green plastic, always labeled with masking tape. She updated it every year like clockwork. Daniel set his glass down and leaned forward. Amelia. If she told you she left the house to you and then suddenly that changed with no explanation, that's not something you brush off. Especially not with the way your mom handles things. I know, I mean it. If there's a chance something shady happened with the will, you need to find out. I sighed and rubbed my hands together, suddenly cold. I don't want to dig up more family mess. Especially not when we're finally away from it. Daniel didn't press. He let the silence settle before speaking again. Ethan deals with estate law, you know. I could ask him to look into it when we're back. Quietly. No drama. Just facts. I hesitated. Ethan was Daniel's friend from grad school. Smart, discreet, exactly the kind of person who wouldn't blink at a complicated family story. Still, it felt like crossing a line. You really think there's something there? I think you've let a lot slide that shouldn't have. And I think maybe this time it's okay to ask for what you were promised. I leaned into him and rested my head against his shoulder. She would have wanted me to fight for it, wouldn't she? I think she would have hated the idea of you letting it go for the sake of someone else's comfort. The wind picked up slightly, brushing my hair across my face. I tucked it behind my ear and stared out at the water, the memory of that house filling my chest. The squeaky front gate. The patch of lavender she planted for me in 6th grade. The worn kitchen counter where she taught me to make pie crust from scratch. That house wasn't just property. It was the only place I'd ever felt like I didn't have to earn my spot. Okay, I said quietly. When we're back in Portland, we'll ask Ethan. Daniel didn't say I told you so. He just nodded and kissed the top of my head. It's not about the house, I added. Not really. I know. It's about finally not letting someone rewrite my story behind my back. Exactly. We stayed out there until the sky turned navy and the air began to cool. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to win something that was supposed to be mine all along. The papaya juice was too sweet and the croissants were too perfect. I sat at our table on the terrace barefoot and sleepy-eyed, watching a heron land on the rocks beyond our villa. The morning had that hazy softness to it, like the world wasn't in a hurry. Daniel was still inside, shaving, humming something low and tuneless. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed against the table. Melissa. Her name alone made me straighten. She hadn't texted since the cat photo. I unlocked the screen and read the message once, then again. You're not going to believe this. The wedding isn't even over and the groom is gone. Like, walked out. My pulse stuttered. I typed back quickly. Gone, where the 3 dots appeared instantly. Apparently right after the vows. He and Ashley had a blow-up backstage. He saw her snap at one of the servers and go off script with her vows. She removed the part about her sister. Entirely. I stared at the screen, my mouth half open. Removed what? Melissa replied. The line where she was supposed to thank you for helping raise her. She changed it without telling anyone. He caught it while she was reading, and when they got backstage, he asked why. She told him it was her day and she didn't want any baggage in the room. I dropped the phone onto the table like it had burned me. Daniel stepped out just then, towel slung over his shoulder, still drying his hands. You okay? I looked up slowly. Trevor walked out of the wedding. He froze. Wait. What? Melissa just texted. They had a fight after the ceremony. Something about Ashley rewriting her vows and being rude to staff. He left. Like, left the venue. No reception, no explanation. Daniel sat down hard in the chair across from me. That can't be real. I held up my phone. It's Melissa. If she says it, it happened. We sat in stunned silence for a moment, the sound of the ocean suddenly louder. Daniel whistled low. I mean, wow. I tried to picture it. The ballroom at the Fairmont in Manhattan. The string quartet. The coordinated bridesmaid gowns. Ashley in that glittering sheath dress she spent 4 weeks agonizing over. And Trevor, wide-eyed, realizing that the woman he just married didn't just delete her sister from the guest list but from the vows too. I imagined her face when she turned to find him gone. My chest didn't swell with pride or schadenfreude. It felt hollow. Strange. Like watching a house collapse from a safe distance. Daniel reached for the coffee pot and poured himself a cup, the action slow and measured. Did you see this coming? Not exactly this. But something. She's always been theatrical. But this is another level. My phone buzzed again. Melissa sent a screenshot. A bridesmaid had already posted on her private story. A picture of Ashley alone at the head table, makeup smudged, champagne glass untouched. Captioned, "Nobody deserves this." Daniel leaned over to read it and exhaled. It's already online. The damage wasn't just personal now. It was public. I flipped the phone face down. Melissa texted again. Apparently Uncle Mike and your dad got into it in front of guests. Something about who should have kept Ashley calm. Grandma cried. They shut the bar down early. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Daniel reached for my hand. You don't have to do either. Just breathe. I looked at him. I'm not happy it's falling apart, but I'm not sorry either. I wasn't the one who set the fire. You weren't even invited to the match. Exactly. I stood and walked to the railing, letting the breeze hit my face. The water glittered like nothing had ever gone wrong in the world. Behind me, Daniel's chair scraped the deck. He came to stand beside me, arms crossed loosely. What happens now? I shook my head. They'll spin it. Say he got cold feet. Say she was blindsided. She'll cry for a week, then post some long caption about resilience and rebirth. Mom will blame me even though I'm 10,000 miles away. They'll rewrite it all. Of course they will. And you? I paused. I'll watch the tide go in and out. I'll swim. I'll sleep. I'll remember that none of it had anything to do with me. Daniel didn't say anything else. The heron took off again, cutting across the sky like it knew exactly where it was going. By the time we returned to our bungalow, my phone had exploded with messages. First came the one from Mom. You need to come home now. Then Dad. Call me. It's about Ashley. Emergency. Then Ashley herself. Please. I don't know what to do. You have to fix this. Each one came stacked on top of the other like little bricks of guilt, the kind I used to carry without question. But this time I stood at the threshold of our room, sand clinging to my calves, and let them pile up without opening a single one. Daniel watched from the patio, shirtless and sun-kissed, holding 2 glasses of something cold and tart. I walked over, dropped my phone face down on the table, and took the one he handed me. They want you back because their version of the fairy tale fell apart, he said. Not because they miss you. I know, I whispered, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. We sat like that for a while, the ocean rustling behind us like an audience waiting for a cue. Eventually, I turned my phone over. Not to respond. Just to look. And in doing so, I noticed one message I hadn't expected. Ethan Rains. That name pulled me out of the lull like a jolt of cold water. I opened it. Call me. I've found something. I excused myself to the bedroom, shut the sliding door behind me, and hit the call button. He picked up on the second ring. Amelia, he said, calm. As always, I got your message about your grandmother's house. I ran a search through the county probate system, and guess what? I sat down on the edge of the bed. What? The last will and testament of Jean Holloway was never superseded. It's still on file, still valid. Still names you as the sole beneficiary of the Eugene property. I blinked. But Mom said Grandma made a new one. Something about dividing things equally. He hesitated. That document does not exist in any legal record. If it does exist, it was never filed. Which means it's not enforceable. My heart began to pound. So what happened? I think your mother deliberately withheld the final will. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. I gripped the edge of the blanket. The same fingers that had packed sunscreen and bathing suits now clenched like fists. She always said it was hers to manage, that Grandma trusted her to do what was right. Ethan's voice dropped lower. You need to understand what this means. If your mother knowingly concealed or destroyed a valid will, she could be charged with fraud. Potentially even theft, depending on the value of the property. I stared at the slatted wood wall, numb. That house was meant for you. And she took it. I thanked him, said I'd follow up when I got back, and ended the call. But I didn't move, not right away. Somewhere beyond the window, I could hear Daniel's laugh mingling with a bird call. Everything out there felt clean and open and untouched. In here, it felt like the past had walked in uninvited. I eventually rejoined him outside. He raised an eyebrow when he saw my face. You okay, number? I told him everything. About the will. The lie. The house I grew up visiting every summer, thinking it would someday be mine because Grandma had promised so. Daniel didn't say I told you so. He didn't even look surprised. He just sat with me while the sun shifted above our heads, then finally said, So what do you want to do? I want to take it back. The word surprised even me. They came out fast, sharp, precise. I want to take back what's mine, I said again, slower this time. Not for revenge. Not to punish her. But because I'm done pretending I owe them something. Daniel reached for my hand and squeezed. Then we take it back. That night I didn't sleep much. While Daniel dozed beside me, I lay in the soft sheets lit only by the blue light of my phone. I scrolled through the unread messages, each more frantic than the last. Ashley's latest: I can't eat. Can't sleep. You just left us. Mom, I don't care where you are. Just come home and help clean this up. Dad, Amelia. For once, stop making this about you. I read each one like it belonged to someone else's drama. They weren't reaching out to me because they missed me. They were reaching out because the show had gone off script and they needed someone to fill the silence. I almost typed a reply, almost. But instead I opened my notes app and typed in Ethan's exact words. The last will remains valid. The house in Eugene is yours. Then I created a folder called Recovery. I moved the note into it. I added a second one: timeline of Grandma's passing. Funeral, Mom's statement about the new will. A third note: witnesses, neighbors. Anyone who might have heard Jean mention her wishes. By 2 a.m. I had 8 notes. A rough outline of the next chapter of my life. One that no longer required permission. Not from Ashley, not from my mother. And not from the version of myself who used to say yes before asking why. I shut off the phone and turned to face Daniel. He stirred barely and tucked his arm around me. I didn't need to explain. He already knew. We stayed like that until dawn. Outside, the ocean kept its rhythm. Inside, something steadier had begun to grow. And by the time morning light spilled across our bed, I knew exactly what I would do next. The sun was already climbing when I stepped out onto the deck. Coffee in hand, the ocean spread out in every direction, like an endless hush. Daniel was still asleep, his face turned toward the warm light pouring through the curtains. I didn't wake him. I needed a moment alone. I sat on the cushioned bench at the edge of the yacht, watching the sea sparkle like someone had scattered diamonds across its surface. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Deserved. My phone buzzed on the table. Again. I didn't check it right away. I knew who it would be. And I knew why. But eventually I turned the screen over. 17 unread messages. Mom. Come home. We need you. Dad, Amelia, please. Your sister's distraught. It's chaos here. Ashley, I messed up. Please come. I can't do this alone. And that one almost made me laugh. It wasn't the first time she'd said she couldn't do something alone. Except when she did, she never meant it in the way most people would. She meant she couldn't be the center of attention without a supporting cast. She couldn't handle consequences without a cleanup crew. She couldn't look in the mirror without someone nearby to remind her she was still the favorite. I scrolled up back to a memory that played out in texts. The last time she needed me. A broken lease in college. A credit card balance she hadn't told our parents about, and a call that came at midnight, sobbing, dramatic, manipulative. I bailed her out. Just like I always did. I dipped into my savings, canceled a weekend trip, and wired her what she needed. No thanks. No follow-up. Just a tagged photo 2 days later of her at a concert, smiling like the world had never fallen apart. I turned the screen face down again. This time was different. Because I wasn't sitting in a cramped Portland apartment with bills on the counter and resentment in my chest. I was in the Maldives. With the man I loved. In a place I had chosen. Daniel stepped outside, his hair still messy, eyes half closed. He blinked at the sun, then came to sit beside me. Still no response, he asked, gently wrapping an arm around my waist. Oh, there's a response. Just not the one they want. He didn't press, just waited. I rested my head on his shoulder and let myself remember. There was a time when I thought Ashley's wedding might finally bring some kind of healing. That maybe being part of it would feel like belonging. That standing beside her at the altar would erase all the years of being sidelined. Instead, they'd made their choice. Cut me out without a second thought. Blocked me from the guest list and still expected me to send a gift. Now they wanted me back, not out of love, not out of apology, but because things had gone wrong. I could imagine the scene clearly. Ashley sobbing in her designer gown. My mother pacing. My father trying to control the optics. The caterers confused, the guests whispering. And they were hoping I'd swoop in and fix it. They still thought I was the same girl who would drop everything and clean up their mess. But I wasn't. I was someone else now. Someone they didn't get to summon like a maid or a PR manager. I walked back inside and grabbed my phone. Daniel watched me, curious but calm. I opened the text thread with my mother. Typed, "I'm somewhere, I'm respected. If you need someone to clean up the mess, I suggest looking elsewhere. Not this time." I copied the message and sent it to my dad too, then to Ashley. And I turned off my phone. Daniel reached for my hand again. "You okay?" "Better than I've been in years." We spent the day on the water snorkeling along coral reefs that looked like alien cities, eating fresh fruit brought out on trays, sipping cocktails with names we couldn't pronounce. And in the late afternoon, as the sun began its golden descent, we found ourselves back on the yacht deck wrapped in towels, skin sun-warmed and bare. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Always. What would you say to the girl you used to be?" I was quiet for a moment. The one who kept trying to earn love by being useful. He nodded. "I think I'd tell her she deserved love just for being. That she didn't have to perform or prove anything or carry anyone's burden to be worthy. That she could say no, walk away, save herself. And then I think I'd tell her to book a flight. To anywhere." He smiled and pulled me close. "You did all of that. You saved her." The boat swayed gently. The sky turned orange and pink and blue all at once. I thought of Ashley, probably still in tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks, trying to rewrite the narrative again. Probably already thinking of how to spin it on Instagram. And I didn't feel pity, I felt nothing at all. Just peace. Finally. And that was worth everything. Melissa's message came just after lunch, while Daniel and I were walking along the shoreline, our feet sinking into warm sand. I felt the vibration before I heard the notification chime. When I glanced down and saw her name, I braced myself. She had sent an audio recording. No caption, no explanation. Just a file titled "Sunday Family Debrief." I hesitated before pressing play. The wind rustled against the speaker as the first voices came through, slightly muffled but unmistakably familiar. My mother's voice, tense, pushing blame onto everyone but herself. My father, quieter, offering clipped responses. Then another voice broke through, clearer and firmer. Claire. My mother's older sister. The black sheep of the family, the one who had always been too emotional or too independent or too much. The one who moved to Colorado after her divorce and only came back for funerals. I hadn't heard her voice in years. But there it was, steady and cutting. "You want to know why Amelia left? Why she didn't show up to patch everything back together like she always does?" Claire's voice had that tight composure that comes from holding something in for too long. "It's because she finally realized she didn't have to. And honestly, I don't blame her." There was a stunned silence in the room on the recording. Then my mother's voice, brittle and shaky. "Claire, this isn't your place." "It became my place," Claire shot back, "the minute you started making Amelia the family's fixer. Just like you tried to do with me, remember that? When Dad walked out when you married Randall and told me not to come home unless I could behave." The room erupted then. Melissa must have set her phone somewhere on the table because I could hear dishes clinking, someone exclaiming something unintelligible, and then Ashley's voice breaking in with a wail. "She's abandoning us. She always wanted to ruin this wedding." Claire didn't flinch. "No, Ashley. You ruined it the moment you decided your image mattered more than your character." Trevor saw it. Amelia just got out of the way. There was a shuffle and what sounded like someone pushing back a chair. My father spoke then, for the first time with any real volume. "We need to calm down. This isn't helping anything." But Claire wasn't finished. "You all talk about family like it's a favor someone owes you. But family means accountability. It means you don't get to erase someone and then expect them to come running when things fall apart." The audio cut off there. I stood frozen on the beach, the sound of waves crashing suddenly louder in the silence. Daniel reached for my phone gently and took it from my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. We walked back to the resort in silence, the sky starting to tint orange and gold. I couldn't stop hearing Claire's voice in my head. How many times had I longed for someone in my family to just name the truth out loud, and now finally someone had. Later that evening after dinner, I sat on the balcony of our villa while Daniel read inside. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine. I was watching the stars emerge when my phone buzzed again. "Melissa." This time it was a text. "They're planning to show up at your place when you get back. Said they'll be waiting with documents and talking points. Just a heads up." My pulse jumped. Another message followed immediately. "I'm sorry. I tried to talk them down, but they're desperate. Especially your mom." I took a breath and typed out a reply. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll be ready." And I would be. I was no longer the girl who showed up just to fix things she didn't break. I was the woman who had finally drawn a line and meant it. Inside, Daniel looked up as I came in. "Everything all right? They're planning to come to the house," I said. "Try to ambush me. Talk me out of whatever they think I'm doing." He frowned. "Do you want me to be there when it happens?" "No," I said. "I think I need to face them alone. At least at first." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Okay. But I'll be 5 minutes away. Just say the word." I went to bed that night thinking about Claire. About what it must have cost her to speak up in that room. About how long she'd held that fire inside just waiting for someone else to get burned before she could say, "I know this feeling. I've lived this too." And for the first time I didn't feel alone in it. They had tried to plan a confrontation. What they didn't realize was that I'd already started planning my answer. The rain had passed sometime during the night, leaving the bungalow wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. I sat cross-legged on the rattan couch, a cup of ginger tea cooling in my hand, and opened the photo app on my tablet. I hadn't looked through these in years. I wasn't sure why I started now. Maybe it was the email from my mother still unread in my inbox. Maybe it was the knowledge that things were finally unraveling and I wanted to remember how they got so tangled to begin with. The first album was labeled Family Trips. There was one from Seaside Heights in 2000, a beach shot where Ashley wore a polka dot bikini and posed with her tongue out front and center. I was in the back, barely visible, holding a towel and staring down at the sand. Then a birthday party. My 8th. But the picture was of Ashley blowing out the candles even though it wasn't her day. I remembered she had cried because I got a bigger gift and Mom had rushed to let her cut the cake. It went on like that. Picture after picture where I was off to the side or holding the camera. School recitals where Ashley wore the brightest costume even if she wasn't in the lead role. Graduations where she stood in the middle, arms flung wide like she was the one crossing the stage. I had learned to disappear long before I ever left. A soft knock came at the screen door. Daniel walked in, barefoot, hair still damp from a morning swim. He sat beside me, brushing a hand over my shoulder. "Looking at anything good?" he asked gently. "Just history," I said, handing him the tablet. I scrolled to a more recent photo. The wedding rehearsal from 2 days ago. Melissa looked like she was trying not to bolt. Dad had his arm around Ashley, but his face was tight, almost grimacing. And Ashley. She was glowing like she was still convinced she was the star of some fairy tale. Daniel studied it in silence, then looked at me. "Do you think she ever really saw you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not really. I was a background character in her movie." He took the tablet and set it down. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know this isn't how people usually do it," he said, "but I can't think of a better time than now. This place. This moment. And you." I blinked, unsure I was hearing him right. "Daniel, are you?" He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, a sapphire set between 2 tiny diamonds. Not flashy. Not loud. Just like him. Just like us. "I don't need a party," he said. "I don't need 100 guests or a blessing from people who don't even see you. I just want you to know I see you. Every day." and I want to keep seeing you for the rest of my life." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I didn't answer right away. I leaned into him, rested my forehead against his. Yes. That was the only word that mattered. We sat there for a long time, listening to the breeze through the palms. I eventually picked up the tablet again, not to scroll but to delete. One by one, I started removing the photos from that old album. Not out of anger, just release. A chime broke the quiet. My inbox lit up. I hesitated, then opened it. The email from my mother had one attachment. A photo. It was of the wedding venue the day after. The chairs half toppled. Flower arrangements wilted in the sun. A buffet table abandoned. Ashley wasn't in the frame, but I could hear her tantrum anyway. The message said, "If you had been here, none of this would have happened. You could have saved it." I handed the tablet to Daniel. He read it, then sighed. "You don't have to reply, I know," I said. "But I will." I opened a new message, typed without overthinking. "I'm not the one who broke it. I'm just the one who stopped pretending it was whole." I hit send. Closed the app. Daniel stood and held out his hand. "Come on. There's a sunset we haven't danced under yet." And so we left the bungalow behind, stepping barefoot into a new chapter I finally chose for myself. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast a warm amber glow across the beach when I saw Ethan's figure approaching from the far side of the pier, carrying his briefcase like it weighed more than paper. He looked slightly out of place in slacks and a button-down among the sarongs and swimsuits, but his eyes found mine and softened as if he too knew this wasn't a moment that required ceremony. Just truth. He greeted Daniel with a firm handshake and me with a hug that lingered a second longer than expected. Then, in the softest voice I'd heard from him, he said he had everything we needed. We walked together back to the open deck of our villa, the ocean breathing steady just beyond the edge, as Ethan laid the folder on the table between us. Inside was everything I'd dared to hope but hadn't allowed myself to expect. A notarized copy of Grandma Jean's final will. Her signature dated just 3 weeks before her stroke. The deed to the Eugene house explicitly passed to me. A handwritten note in the margins of the draft, almost illegible but unmistakably hers. It said simply, "For Amelia. Always." I didn't cry, not right away. It was a strange kind of quiet victory. The kind that didn't demand applause or revenge. Just acknowledgement. Daniel skimmed the documents beside me, his thumb grazing mine. Ethan explained what we could do next. File to challenge the transfer made by my mother. Pursue restitution, press charges even if we wanted. I let him talk. I needed the facts, yes, but not the fire, not today. Eventually I stood up and closed the folder. We could deal with justice tomorrow. Tonight I wanted peace. We changed into simple clothes. I slipped into a white linen dress I had packed last minute, not knowing why. Daniel wore a cream shirt and pants rolled up at the ankle. Barefoot we walked along the shoreline as Ethan trailed behind with a leather pouch containing 2 simple gold bands. There was no aisle, no crowd, no floral arch or drone photographer. Just us, a gentle breeze, and the sea turning gold. We stopped where the water kissed our toes and turned to face each other. Daniel's voice cracked only once as he said he had no vows prepared, just one promise that he would never let me question again whether I was enough. I smiled, barely breathing, and reached for his hand. I told him I didn't need vows either. That for the first time in my life I wasn't standing beside someone else's spotlight waiting to be seen. That this quiet, this moment, this man was enough. More than enough. Ethan handed us the rings. I slid his on with trembling fingers. He slid mine on like he'd done it in his dreams 1,000 times. We kissed gently and laughed at how strange it was to feel so full with no music, no crowd, no clinking of champagne glasses. Only the sound of waves and our breath catching in the stillness. Afterward we sat in the sand, the tide tugging at our feet, watching the horizon blur into evening. Ethan gave us space, retreating to the villa with a nod. We didn't speak much, we didn't need to. At one point I looked at Daniel and said it aloud. The words had lived in my chest too long. I'm not her shadow anymore. He didn't ask who I meant, he just leaned in and kissed my temple. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I picked up a small seashell beside me and turned it in my palm. You know, when Ashley and I were little, she always got to go first. First to speak first, to choose ice cream first, to open presents. I used to think that meant I'd always be second. But maybe I was just waiting for the right thing to go first at. Daniel smiled. And now I think I finally chose something that wasn't handed to me or taken from me. I chose us. The sky shifted again now, a soft indigo stars beginning to blink awake. Daniel pulled a blanket over our shoulders and we leaned back side by side, letting the silence stretch between us like a vow. There were still loose ends to tie. A house to reclaim, people to face. But for tonight, the world could wait. I was no longer someone's backup plan, someone's afterthought. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And for the first time, my story didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a beginning. I woke early the next morning before the first ripple of sunlight touched the sea. The air was soft and still, and the silence felt less like emptiness and more like peace. I opened my laptop at the small writing desk in our villa and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank email screen. There wasn't much to say, not because I didn't have thoughts or history or hurt, but because I had finally let go of the part of me that needed them to understand it all. I wasn't writing for closure. I wasn't writing to argue or justify or invite discussion. I typed the subject line, returning. Then just one sentence in the body. I'll be coming back to Eugene next week. Not to fix anything. Just to collect my belongings and the keys to the house. That's all. No salutation. No signature. Just a full stop and a quiet kind of finality. I hit send. Closed the laptop. Powered off my phone. And just like that, I stopped waiting for their voices. Daniel was still asleep when I stepped outside to the veranda, the warm wood slats cool under my feet. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, and in the early light, everything felt weightless. I breathed in deep and slow and let my body remember what it felt like to be unburdened. We spent the day on a boat that circled the smaller islands nearby. A local guide named Ti.K.T.ok pointed out dolphins in the distance and reef shadows beneath the glass-bottomed deck. There were only 6 other people on board, none of whom knew our story, none of whom needed to. They smiled, passed sunscreen, complimented my shell earrings. We laughed without explaining anything. At one stop, we swam near a coral reef, Daniel reaching for my hand beneath the water. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told me what I already knew. This was the beginning of a life no longer written by other people's expectations. That evening, after dinner on the beach, I wandered off by myself for a walk. The resort had set up a line of lounge chairs along the shore, now mostly empty as the guests turned in. I found one far from the rest, just near a curve of palm trees. I didn't sit, I just looked at it. A single chair facing the water. Quiet, unclaimed. No name on it, no towel, no drink tray. Just space. I thought about all the photos taken over the years. Family portraits, Christmas cards, graduation. Ashley always in the center. Mom in pearls. Dad with his tight, practiced smile, and me always a little off to the side. Always smiling just enough. There used to be a time when I'd imagine where I'd fit in the next shot, how I might stand taller, smile brighter, make myself more necessary to the frame. Now I didn't need the photo. The chair could stay empty. Maybe it had always been waiting to be empty. I crouched down and let my fingers brush the warm wood. Then I stood, turned, and walked back to Daniel, who was already lighting a lantern for us back on the deck. The next morning we packed. No rush, no drama. Ethan had left earlier on the red-eye flight, taking the folder of documents back with him. He promised he'd start the legal process as soon as I gave him the green light. I told him to wait until I got home. I wanted to do the rest in person. Before we boarded the boat back to the mainland, I turned once more toward the ocean. Not to say goodbye, but to take a mental snapshot. Not for a scrapbook or a social post. Just for me. The sea didn't need me to pose, it just needed me to be there. On the flight home, Daniel slept beside me while I scrolled through old photos on my phone. I stopped at one from 10 years ago, Christmas at the Eugene house. I was holding a tray of cookies. Ashley had a new camera she wouldn't stop flashing. My mother was rearranging ornaments behind us. I was smiling, but my eyes were somewhere else. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I deleted it. There would be new pictures, ones I'd want to keep. Not to prove anything, just to remember. When we landed in Oregon, the air smelled like pine and soil. Daniel drove while I watched the familiar streets blur past. We pulled into the driveway of the Eugene house just as the sun was dipping behind the trees. No one was home. I'd told them what time I'd come. Maybe they believed I wouldn't show. Or maybe they just didn't want to see what I looked like when I came back on my own terms. I unlocked the door with the spare key I still had, walked inside, and took a long breath. The scent was the same. Lemon cleaner and a faint trace of my mother's perfume. I didn't linger. I went straight to my old room. Packed the boxes I'd left behind years ago. A few books, my journals, some childhood keepsakes. I found my grandmother's quilt in the bottom of the closet. I folded it gently and placed it on top. Then I went to the kitchen drawer and found the labeled envelope house keys. I took the one marked Amelia's room and one for the back door. I left a note beside the fruit bowl. Keys retrieved. My things are gone. I wish you peace. Back in the car, Daniel reached over and took my hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. The chair on the beach was still in my mind. Empty. Waiting for no one. And for the first time, that emptiness felt full. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like the extra in someone else's life, I hope this reminded you that you get to choose your own ending. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if this story meant something to you, remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next one.